Hello there once again, my young friends. It's Mr. Johnson coming to you here from Westlake High School, classroom 408 here in Johnson Land. Ready to take you through a couple more poems in our little 6-poem study of mostly Elizabethan poems. Hopefully a good little picture of what poetry was like back in the crack of that time back in England. Today we're going to be looking at a poem called My Mistress' Eyes. It's one of Shakespeare's more famous sonnets, Sonnet 130, and a poem by John Donne called Batter My Heart. In looking at My Mistress' Eyes, a couple of things maybe to jot down on your handout. First thing is this particular poem is kind of mocking the sonnet style of someone called Petrarch. This poem is basically mocking or kind of poking fun at the Petrarchan sonnet style. Petrarch is an Italian poet before Shakespeare's time. Petrarch, Petrarch. And he wrote these very stylized, kind of elaborate comparison poems, how a woman's beauty, a woman in general, is meant to be worshipped from afar, how she was up on a pedestal, and how you should revere her beauty, which of course we know is true. But Shakespeare had this idea that a woman's beauty was to be more deeply appreciated if she was right next to you, not if she was far away from you, and the idea that her being near you is a more personal thing. Also, this particular sonnet is kind of a parody of a poem by Sir Philip Sidney, maybe something in modern day thinking you could understand is the idea of Weird Al Yankovic, who many of you have heard of, possibly heard of, who would take these songs by famous artists and write parodies and kind of change the lyrics and whatnot to the same melody. This is Shakespeare taking a poem by Sidney called My Mistress' Eyes Are Like the Sun, and Shakespeare writes My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, and line by line kind of just refutes a lot of the ideas that Sidney put forward. It's a very clever poem. Ironically, it's maybe one of Shakespeare's least original because it's a parody of someone else's work, but it's one of his most maybe clever. Let's look at this poem. It's called My Mistress' Eyes. Let's get a first read through on it. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare, as any she belied with false compare. First of all, looking at this poem, one thing you need to note is that if you don't really get to the couplet at the end, if you don't really grasp what Shakespeare's trying to say at the end, and a lot of times in his couplet, his last 2 lines, he's making an overall statement, then it sounds like he's kind of making fun of his lady and talking about her flaws. But in essence, what he's really saying, and maybe the overall main point of the poem, if you want to jot this down on your handout, is that her flaws, his lady's flaws, make their love more real. Her flaws, her imperfections, make their love more real. As he goes through and says a lot of things about her that seem like he's making fun of some of her imperfections, what he's basically saying, and again in contrast to a Petrarchan sonnet, maybe, and certainly in contrast to Sir Philip Sidney's My Mistress' Eyes Are Like the Sun, what he's really saying is, because she's right next to me and I'm close enough to notice some of these flaws, that's a much more personal thing than his lady being so far out of reach and whatnot. Let's kind of go through line by line and maybe just kind of mark some things. This is a fairly simple thing to understand once you get into it. First of all, in the first line, my mistress' eyes, we think of the word mistress as someone cheating or running around with their spouse. In this context, it really means my lover, my lady, my lover. Her eyes are nothing like the sun. Maybe mark line 2. Coral is far more red than her lips red. And if you were to maybe annotate or put anything out to the side, just the idea that her lips not so red. She doesn't have these beautiful red lips that always just show in that way. Women can enhance. We dealt with this Hamlet when Hamlet was talking to Ophelia. Women can enhance their appearance by wearing makeup, and maybe his lady, needs lipstick to make her lips look that red. Her lips are not so red. In line 4, maybe mark that. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. He says basically in line 4, maybe mark that, highlight it, underline it, whatever. He says that sometimes her hair is a bit wiry. It's not always smooth and flowing and whatnot. Sometimes maybe, when she first wakes up or when her hair's been tousled or it's the end of a day maybe, and she hasn't brushed it in a while, that her hair looks a little bit wiry. And again, it sounds like he's mocking her, but he's really not. Maybe mark line 6, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. He seems to be saying her cheeks are not always so rosy red. And again, she can enhance the color of her cheeks with makeup, with putting on some makeup and whatnot. Her cheeks are not so rosy. In line 8, some perfumes are more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. In line 8, maybe mark that. And he seems to be saying her breath is not always so perfectly sweet. None of us as humans always have the sweetest breath. Sometimes, like when we first wake up, or just depending on what we've eaten, sometimes what emanates from our mouths is not the sweetest breath. And he says that sometimes his lady, his mistress, has breath that isn't so nice. Certainly in line 10, he says in line 9, loves to hear her speak. Maybe mark line 10, but that music hath a far more pleasing sound. Sometimes maybe her voice is not so pleasant, not so musical. If you want to, jot anything out to the side, her voice not so musical. I'm getting a phone call right now. I don't know if hopefully that's not showing up on your video. I'm trying to kind of wait till it passes. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. That music hath a far more pleasing sound. Maybe mark line 12, my mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. He says in line 11, I grant I never saw a goddess go. Maybe mark line 12, my mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. Sometimes her walk is not always so graceful. Yes, she's my lady. I love the way she moves, but her movement doesn't just flow like a goddess. She's like a human. Sometimes when she walks, she maybe stumbles. Maybe her walk is not so graceful. So again, in those first 12 lines of that particular poem, it just sounds like he is mocking her, making fun of her. But what he's really doing is trying to say, these are some quote-unquote flaws or imperfections I've noticed because she is right next to me. That is so much more real than someone who's way above and way out of reach and hard to attain. Definitely mark, highlight, underline, whatever, the last 2 lines of the poem, the couplet. And yet by heaven, I think my love is rare, as any should be lied in false compare. And maybe jot down to the side, he says, our love is real, it needs no fake comparison. Our love is real, it needs no false comparison, no fake comparison. I don't need to make things up to talk about her beauty and elaborate on all these kinds of things, because our love is personal, because it's intimate, because she's right next to me. Our love is real, it needs no fake comparison. And again, the overall main point of the poem is her flaws seem to make their love more real. That is Shakespeare's My Mistress' Eyes Are Like the Sun, or Nothing Like the Sun, excuse me. Last point for this particular video is Batter My Heart, and of the 6 that we are going to study, it's probably the most difficult language-wise to really understand, so maybe tune in with me as I take you through. A little bit about John Donne. Not you necessarily need to know this for the test, but a little background on who he is will make this, the content of the poem, his writing it, even make some sense. John Donne was a very devoted Christian. He was a very successful preacher of the day, and he wrote a collection of sonnets called the Holy Sonnets, which were basically kind of used by him, I think, as sermons, as messages when he would preach. And certainly this particular poem that he's talking to God, asking God to batter his heart, is a person who has a relationship with God. It seems to understand the difference between religion and relationship. It's a very personal relationship. It's not his faith, maybe not just an active religious practice. And he's asking God, he wants to be very useful, in his kingdom and doing work for him. So he wants God to break him. And maybe the idea, maybe make it a little easier to understand, is a lot of times in life, if we want to be stronger for something, we have to go through a period of difficulty. Physically, and you've noticed that I'm just massively huge. Obviously, I'm just a large person, which is funny because it's ridiculously untrue. But if a person were very, very big, they would not have gotten that way without working out. What does working out do? It literally tears the muscle, so the muscle can be built back up. You can't get physically stronger, especially really, really strong, without some level of suffering, without some level of pain. The same thing kind of applies in emotional struggles. You go through a lot of emotionally difficult things. That can make you an emotionally stronger person, ready to face other difficulties that come. Same kind of thing with even your mind. One of the things about high school that we do a poor job of is really making you use your mind. And part of your aura sometimes is to do everything you can to not really have to do things that are hard. If it's hard, you just kind of shut down on it sometimes. Some of you do. A lot of you do. But when you really push yourself and you struggle, you put outside of your comfort zone and you try difficult things and you have to use your mind gets stronger, your mind gets better. You can actually increase your ability to use it well. The same kind of thing can apply to spiritual matters. John Donne saying, God, if you'll allow me to suffer, if you'll allow me, if you'll break me and then rebuild me, I can be a stronger person for you. And that's the overall point of this poem, even before we read a word of it. He's asking God to break him so that God can use him. He's asking God to break him so God can use him. Let me read all the way through this poem and then take you back through and have you mark some things and maybe give you some useful annotations as far as what it all means because of the language. And if you can just, tune in with me, maybe I can make this poem make some sense to you. It's John Donne, Batter My Heart. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you, as yet but not breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, or throw me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town, to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end, reason your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Let's go back to the beginning and maybe just that first line, batter my heart, three-person God, maybe mark that in the first line. Now to the side, real simple, even if you're not particularly religious or haven't really spent a lot of time with the Bible or Christianity or whatever, you're probably familiar with the concept of the Trinity, that God, or at least in the Bible claims that God exists in three persons, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So when he says three-person God, he's just talking about the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Maybe something you should mark, and here's one of the real main ideas of the poem. The end of line 2, starting with "and seek to mend," if you can mark from there to the end of line 4. "And seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn." And here's the key line, maybe double underline this or double highlight it, circle it, whatever. "Make me new." He's basically saying in this line, God, break me down so you can build me back up. Break me down. God, break me down so you can build me back up. If you were to jot anything out to the side, I would suggest something like that. God, I want to be stronger. I want to be better for you. So I'm asking you to overthrow me, bend, break, blow, burn, just put me down so that you can make me new, so you can build me back up. And this is, again, a lot of times maybe with our religion or just in things in life that we want to be a part of, it depends on how the level of commitment we really have toward it is how much we're willing to put into it. It's one thing to sit in the church every Sunday or just be, kind of quote unquote religious, but in a relationship that needs fostering, needs developing, sometimes there can be struggle to make that relationship close. And he's saying, God, I want to be useful to you, so break me so you can build me. Maybe in line 5, mark the end of that line, "to another do." Maybe just those 3 words. And you have a little footnote there at the bottom that says, basically owing allegiance to the devil. He basically is admitting that he has divided loyalties. And maybe out to the side, something like this, flesh versus spirit. There's a lot of examples in even in the Bible, the New Testament. Paul talks about, man, I wish I could do the things I'm supposed to do, but the natural tendency is for me to do things I want to do instead of things I should do. Jesus himself said that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, when he was just trying to pray a certain prayer in the garden. Basically, the poet here says, "To another do." I want to serve well for you, but sometimes I'm serving, quote unquote, the devil, which is, when we serve ourselves or when we give in to, quote unquote, sin, if you believe in that concept. The idea that sometimes we just get kind of bogged down in those things. Divided loyalties. Maybe mark lines 7 and 8. This is useful in the context of looking at religious thought anyway, because sometimes the mind can be a hindrance. Line 7 and 8. "Reason your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue." Maybe out to the side of that line, those lines. "My reason is too weak to get me to do the right thing. My reason, logic, is too weak to get me to do right. One of the struggles, I think, for a lot of people, very intelligent people, is that maybe they want to pursue, religion, religious thought, but sometimes the mind, thinking, a lot of things about God just don't make any sense whatsoever. Faith is something that you accept without necessarily having things proven, and that's difficult for a lot of people, and rightly so. It's very understandable to me. It's something I personally struggled with. A lot of things about God or religion or whatever are difficult to grasp because they're not easily explainable, and it's not something you can just necessarily prove. It's something you have to just accept. He's like, man, I wish I could do right by you, but I get bogged down by my own thinking, my own mind. Line 10, maybe mark that. I am betrothed unto your enemy. The idea of being just tied. Once again, he says he's tied to the devil. And maybe mark line 11, divorce me or untie or break that knot again. Excuse me, line 11, divorce me, untie, break that knot again. Maybe mark that line. And he basically says, rip me away, tear me away from the enemy. The idea that sometimes if we try to on our own break ourselves away, we just make that knot tighter. Like if you're trying to untie your shoe and you just pull on the shoelace and you pull on maybe the wrong one, instead of it coming untied, it just makes that knot tighter, and then you yourself are not able to get that knot undone. You have to have an outside force, like something with a sharp tip, like an ice pick or something, to get in there and undo that knot. Same kind of thing kind of applies here. If I'm tied to my own desires, I'm tied to my sin, I'm tied to quote unquote the devil, without some outside force, I can't really release myself. You have to come and release me and help me untie that knot. So rip me away from the enemy. Last thing, end of line 12, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free. Basically says, I'll never be free unless you enslave me. I'll never be free from my own, sin, my own desires and whatnot, unless you come in and enslave me. So the end of line 12 and line 13, the paradox of that, there's no real freedom in my doing this. I seriously need you to get involved and take me close to you so that I'm free from the worldly things and my own sin and my own desire and whatnot. Very deep kind of theological, spiritual poem, and very typical of John Donne and his Holy Sonnets. It's a good maybe example of some of the poetry written in that day by John Donne. It's called Batter My Heart, and the overall point of it is asking God to break him so that God can use him. So that's my Mistress Eyes by Shakespeare and Batter My Heart by John Donne. I hope that's a little useful to you in preparation for your little test when we take a test on the packet of these poems. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. I hope it's been useful to you. And okay, bye.